Good evening, everyone. Thank you for making the time this evening to learn more about special assessments. On behalf of the City of Fargo, Commissioner Gehrig and myself, I'm Commissioner Tony Grinberg, Mayor Mahoney, who will be joining us later, Commissioner Pepcorn, and Commissioner Strand. We thank you for your interest in providing additional feedback as we look to the future in strengthening our city's growth strategy, as well as addressing the issue of special assessments. I'm going to go into some introductions in a moment or two on a slide with the task force members, but I'd also like to recognize the fine staff that we have at the City of Fargo, and if I could just ask them to stand. So tonight's agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to give a perspective on the specials. Commissioner Gehrig is going to provide a few remarks. And then Mr. John Shockley, who is legal counsel for a number of communities, municipal governments, on this whole issue of special assessments, is going to provide a backdrop on what's allowable in the state's entry code. And then former City Commissioner John Cosgriff, who served as a member of the task force, is also going to share an update from the task force results and their rankings. When we started our first meeting last August, I asked for a show of hands, how many are currently paying special assessments? So I'm going to ask everybody in the room that are currently paying special assessments to raise your hand. Looks like just about everybody. Tonight's agenda, to reinforce, is truly to receive more feedback from citizens on this topic, on this challenge, on this issue of special assessments. From my perspective, I'm here to listen tonight and learn more about your thoughts and ideas. And as an elected official, I'm sure Commissioner Gehrig would agree, that's important to us as we go about the business of leading the City of Fargo. Many of you know that I served in the legislature for many years and learned many years ago that I think one of the toughest jobs we have as elected officials is representing the silent majority. Because we always have opposing views on issues and people's opinions, but the vast majority of people, in my experience, particularly in the legislature, choose not to get involved. And so when we have opportunities like this, it really is valuable for me to hear more of the thoughts and ideas of what people are thinking, because it gives us an idea how to move forward as a city in this case. Tonight, we'll also have an opportunity, a set of slides to ask for public comment. And I think everybody should have received a handout that has some of those questions and thoughts. If you are not comfortable raising your questions or thoughts here in this setting, you can submit those online and through other means through the City of Fargo's website, or call one of us as well. We're open to calls and information as well from beyond tonight. And the microphone for tonight is way over on my left, your right, that we need you to use for your comments and questions so it can pick up on the Facebook streaming live and the recording. As I mentioned, this is the ninth meeting of a series of meetings that started last August. The 10th meeting will be on Thursday night for another public forum, and then we'll determine next steps from the task force as well as ultimately the City Commission, which will have the ultimate responsibility to make changes to the special assessments policy for the City of Fargo. Just to reinforce the agenda then tonight, Mr. Shockley will provide a history and a North Dakota overview of the Century Code. Mr. John Cosgriff will share perspectives from the Special Assessment Task Force. We'd like to spend the majority of our time on public comment, and we'll allow approximately 10 minutes per each section. And if more time is required, we'd encourage you to write those things down and submit online. We'll do our best to manage time to see how the evening goes. And then Mayor Mahoney will be here for a wrap-up session. A little bit about the scope of work adopted by the City Commission last summer was to review history of special assessments in the City of Fargo to current and past funding methodologies for greenfield development, or new development, if you will, and past funding methodology and upgrading the City of Fargo existing infrastructure, streets, materials, public safety, water, and sewer. Task Force also spent time researching, reviewing, and recommending innovative financing options to include the elimination of the current voter-approved sales tax special assessment funding practice and replacing with other options. Just a quick overview of the meetings and the content, if I may. Last August, when we first came together, the committee talked about the economic effects of specials on homeowners in established neighborhoods, housing costs and affordability, fairness of concerns and defining the benefits, economic effects on businesses, notification process, and the issue of escalating costs for public improvements. The September meeting covered an overview of the history of special assessments by Mr. John Shockley, who you'll hear from in a moment, with the Onsted Twitchell firm. It included options how to pay for infrastructure, who benefits from various bond initiatives, fund balances when bonds are paid, and how engineering fees are set were some of the topics we talked about in September. And then at the end of September, we went through and had an update from Kent Costin, the City of Fargo Finance Director, and explained the nuances and the methodologies and approaches around special assessments and the policies at the City of Fargo at present. In October, Gloria Palm Connor, one of our members of our task force, provided information on regional houses and house prices and wages. And Don Dabbert, from representing the home builders, talked about economic impact and trends from the national perspective with the Home Builders Association. We also heard from Bismarck administrators on their efforts to address the special assessment program in Bismarck with other means like street utility taxes, street maintenance fees, etc. In November, we did a kind of a recap of our effort to date, and we decided that we would go down two paths: a discussion on greenfield or new development, as well as existing neighborhoods when we come in and work with the neighborhoods for revitalizing their neighborhood with new water, sewer, and streets. And then we had discussion in further November with utility funds being used for replacement of existing construction for assessments. At our February 2019 meeting, we had additional presentations on utility, Commissioner Gehrig led, as well as the results from the survey that you're going to hear about shortly. And then in May, here last month, we had a recap of our capital improvement plan at the City of Fargo, and then a legislative wrap-up for our efforts to date. Task force members here this evening. I see Jim Bullis is here. Jim, can you wave? Kent Busick, did you make it? Kent's here. John Cosgriff is here. Don Dabbert here. Christy, I see here. Christy Fremstead. Kurt Grosky, Kurt's here. Kevin Hansen from Gate City Bank. Jeff Volk is here. Gloria Palm Connor is here. And Bill Worth, did you make it? Is Bill Worth here tonight? Bill's a North Fargo Broadway resident who served on the task force as well. And then Commissioner Gehrig and I, as well as an ex officio, Mayor Bernie Dartis from the City of West Fargo is here as well. And so one thing else that noted that you'll see more on later in the presentation is actions that were made last summer on the policy change of the special assessment policy at City of Fargo. Prior to last summer, there was a 50-50 cost share with caps. Last summer, it went back to a 70-30 cost share, which in my opinion, I think really alleviated some of the concerns, particularly in North Broadway with that project that we heard a lot of sentiment from. And so I'll call that out as pay attention to these slides as we move forward, because the whole notion of what the state has done now, providing additional funding for infrastructure, will have a dramatic impact on the decisions we make at the City of Fargo and lowering taxes for residents, and particularly in their specials. It's been titled the Prairie Dog Bill, or House Bill 1066. You need to thank your local legislators who really worked hard to see that this legislation was passed to bring oil revenues and the robust economy we have in the state of North Dakota to the east. And as Bruce Grubb said early on, when Representative Al Carlson, former House Majority Leader, and Senator Rich Wardner kicked off this concept last summer, this is a game changer for taxpayers. And you'll see that and get evidence of that tonight as we move forward. So I encourage you to, when you see your legislators, thank them for their support of this bill. Here in Cass County, Representative Michael Howe was one of the sponsors of the bill. I see Representative Thomas Beatles in the room tonight as well, so he worked hard on this as well. Many of us spent a lot of hours last session advocating for this legislation. And to give you an example, I think north of $25 million will come to Cass County in 2020, the year 2020, to the cities of Fargo, West Fargo, the other communities, and Cass County government for the purpose of underwriting and supporting infrastructure costs to lower the tax burden on taxpayers. And that was one of the clear directives from the legislature when they introduced this concept. Given the financial strength of the state, it's now time to spread that wealth across the state, and we want to see it impact property tax owner or property taxpayers, and i.e. specials. So with that, I'm going to call on Commissioner Gehrig. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks for everybody for coming. I think it's important to see the faces in the crowd here, so it's nice to see these many people show up. About a year and a half ago, as Tony was talking about, we heard from the residents of Fargo about special assessments. North Broadway is the big impetus for the feedback that we had with some people receiving up to $20,000 of assessments. This task force was one of the results of that feedback from the people of Fargo, which was very important. So, as Tony said, this task force started looking into how we special assess with all the ways that he talked about from every one of those meetings. And now it's time for the public's input so that we can do something about that feedback that we received. And as I see it, I see three basic options. Option number one, do nothing. And I don't think the people of Fargo would appreciate that very much. That's why your feedback is so important. Option two is to somehow end special assessments. Tony talked about the Prairie Dog bill. If oil is at $40 a barrel, we in Fargo will receive about $13 million per year from the state. Bernie, what's the oil at today? 62? $62. That's 50% more. So if that's the case, we'll receive $20 million from the state just for infrastructure. That's one way we could end special assessments. The third thing we can do is somehow reduce the impact of special assessments. And that's a large part of what we're asking you guys to bring to the table today. Look at the options, look at the information that we're going to present to you, see if you want to do nothing, end them, or somehow vastly reduce them. So it's extremely important that we get the input. I wish this room was absolutely full. I realize people are busy. There will be more meetings. But what I'm asking for the folks here today to do is take the sheets with you, take the website with you, email them to your friends, talk to your family. It doesn't matter if they own property in Fargo or not. If they rent here, these things affect them as well. So it's not just for property owners, it's for renters as well, or business owners especially. So please spread out the word. Please provide your feedback, because it will matter to the Fargo City Commission what people say and how many people say it, especially that. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Good evening. Thank you for showing up tonight. My name is John Shockley, and I'm an attorney with Onstead Twitchell. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the special assessment process in North Dakota. Just a brief disclaimer, I'm not here representing any party. I don't represent the city of Fargo. So if you have any specific questions regarding the city of Fargo, I'm not representing the city of Fargo. I'm not here to provide a policy direction or initiative. I'm just simply here to provide some information and background regarding the special assessment process, and feel free to ask questions. I would note that the presentation that I provided to the task force is far lengthier than tonight's presentation. My understanding is the meetings were taped, so if you're interested in the full presentation, that's available. It's about a 45-minute presentation. So tonight I'm just going to try to give a brief overview and stay within that 10-minute window of time. So briefly, the history of special assessments, oftentimes people ask me, where did special assessments come from? Over the years, I've researched the issue, and the earliest times of reference to special assessments that I could find predated the founding of the United States and actually go back to Great Britain and England. Regarding levying special assessments for all swamp draining. And that concept migrated along with many of the other aspects of government to the United States. And in the initial research regarding some case law, I found that special assessments were referenced by a court back in 1691. So they've been in the United States a long time. There's a specific case, a reported case out of Missouri from 1857 that cites back to New York law from prior to the founding of the United States. The prevalence of special assessments today, every state in the union has some form of special assessments. That doesn't mean that they use them, but there's some authority listed within every state code that allows political subdivisions to levy special assessments. That could be in water resource districts, that could be for cities, that could be for other forms of political subdivision. So it is prevalent throughout the United States. It's a matter of how states utilize that authority. Getting specific to North Dakota, North Dakota has had special assessments once again since the founding of the state. There is references in older versions of the Century Code to the authority to levy special assessments. So how do special assessments in North Dakota work? Special assessments are a creation of law that allows cities or other political subdivisions to levy the costs associated with various improvements. The various improvements have to be authorized by state statute. In state statutes specific to cities, those normally include water, sewer, storm sewer, lift stations, streets, curb and gutter, sidewalks. And so all special assessments have their foundation in state statute. So if a project is authorized to be levied by state statute, then the city commission has the authority to create what's referred to as an improvement district, which is really the authorization to move forward with a project that may be specially assessed. Once the project is created, the engineers go through a process of putting together an engineering report. This engineering report is accepted by the city commission or city council, depending on the form of government, and then it is bid out, publicly bid. Cities in North Dakota are required to follow Century Code regarding the lowest responsible bidder, so they have to select the lowest responsible bidder for each project. And then once the project is completed by the contractor, it moves on to the special assessment process. And the special assessment process involves the Special Assessment Commission. And you may have heard about the Special Assessment Commission. If you've been assessed before, you may have received notices. Special Assessment Commission by Century Code is composed of a minimum of 3 people, residents of the city in which the assessments are going to be levied. The Special Assessment Commission will meet with its engineering staff, with its legal counsel, possibly with its finance personnel and other city personnel regarding levying special assessments. The Special Assessment Commission then, based upon the recommendations given by its technical advisors and consulting staff, will arrive at a proposed assessment. That proposed assessment is then published in a newspaper. Some cities will go above and beyond the requirements of publication and actually send notice to property owners. That notice then is for a public hearing before the Special Assessment Commission. At that time, anybody who is proposed to be specially assessed can make their objection to the assessment. The assessment commissioners will then make a determination of whether that objection is valid or not valid, and then they can further adjust the assessments. If a property owner is unhappy with the decision by the Special Assessment Commission, they can then appeal their decision to the City Commission. That appeal has to be in writing, and then the City Commission will make a determination of whether or not that's a valid appeal. If the property owner still is not happy with that decision, they do have the ability to appeal that decision to court. I would note that some of you who are familiar with local government, Special Assessment Commissions are unique in that they actually make a decision rather than a Planning and Zoning Commission that simply makes recommendations. So your members of your Special Assessment Commission have the ability to make a decision. They make the decision, and that can be appealed to the City Council. So what are the main methods of assessment? Assessments are created by law, and the North Dakota Supreme Court has interpreted multiple cases regarding the authority of political subdivisions to levy special assessments. And there are many different ways a city can levy special assessments, but in general, there are 3 main areas of special assessments. One is front footage, and that's for a typical road project. If your lot abuts a road that is going to be rebuilt or constructed, the assessment that will be levied against your lot is based upon front footage. The second is per hookup. So for an average homeowner, if you're getting a reconstruct of your water and sewer hookups or a brand new lot, it'll be an equivalent unit or a single charge for a hookup. And the third is by area. Typically for drainage or storm sewer, we assess on an area basis, the idea being that the water falls equally, the rain falls equally upon the area within the lot, and that justifies the assessment. What are the average length of assessments and interest rates? In North Dakota, pursuant to the Century Code, a city can assess for up to 30 years. My experience in this area has been most cities only go to a maximum of 25 years. That doesn't mean that you can't assess for a shorter term. Some cities, depending upon the size of the project, the type of the project, may have a shorter of assessment. I've seen some smaller cities will levy an assessment for a period of 7 years if it's a very small project, or maybe 15 years. But given the increasing cost of infrastructure, the time of the assessment has increased. What is the interest rate? The interest rate that is charged to homeowners is the interest rate that the city pays for money it borrows to fund the reconstruction or the construction of the project, which is specially assessed. So that is capital cost that the city absorbs. So when the city goes ahead and constructs a project and levies special assessments, it will go out and undertake what is referred to as bonding. And these are refunding improvement bonds, or known as special assessment bonds. And they're bonds that are sold to the market. They have bondholders who will pay money for the bonds, and in exchange, they'll receive a repayment of principal and interest. And so the interest rate that's charged to property owners is the interest rate on the bonds, which typically ranges anywhere from 3.5% to 4.5%. But historically, in the 80s, that was much higher. By Century Code, cities can charge up to 1.5% higher than the bond interest rate. Some cities charge a full 1.5% interest rate. My understanding is the city of Fargo charges less than that. And what is the purpose of that additional interest? That is for people who don't pay their special assessments, for defaults on property, for late payments, or prepayments. If there's too many prepayments in a district, the city may not have sufficient money to make the debt service payments or the bond payments every year. So what are the major areas of special assessments? And I'm sorry I'm moving along very quickly, but I'm trying to give just a brief overview. So as Commissioner Grinberg had noted, there's really two major areas of special assessments. One which we refer to as greenfields, and that's your brand new housing developments or brand new commercial developments. A good example is in South Fargo, where vacant land is converted into a housing development. They typically include new roads, oversized regional infrastructure, and all of the other aspects of new development. It could be sidewalks, it could be water and sewer connections, it could be storm sewer connections. Park districts do assess for park equipment. My understanding is the Fargo Park District does also create improvement districts and assesses for park improvements. Those are typically undertaken pursuant to an agreement between the city and the developer, where the city agrees that it will specially assess the costs associated with development to the new property. And then once a homeowner buys the property, they assume the special assessments against the property. The other major area which probably causes more issues for property owners is reconstruction. So in existing parts of the community, a road might need to be reconstructed, water and sewer hookups may need to be rebuilt because the sewer is collapsed, or sidewalks need to be reconstructed. And so this often occurs in the older parts. A good example is Main Street reconstruction. You need to reconstruct Main Avenue. How do you pay for that? And cities are authorized to use special assessments to pay for it. So one of the things I thought was important to cover, and as part of the task force, was what are the issues associated with using special assessments for greenfield developments versus having a developer pay for them. And then I'll also get in, Sorry. I will also get into reconstruction issues. And so there's several advantages and disadvantages to having the city issue special assessments for greenfield redevelopment. So the advantages are when the city goes ahead pursuant to an agreement with the developer, the city controls the engineering, controls the construction, and the oversight. So the construction is done pursuant to city code. It's compliant infrastructure. The city is eventually going to take over it. So the city knows what it is getting. It's essentially overseeing that construction. So when it takes over operating and maintaining that infrastructure, it has assurance that the pipe is the right size, that it's going to connect to other city infrastructure, the pumps are going to work. I list this in the advantages, that the developer does not have carrying costs. You may ask, well, why is that an advantage? If you require developers to carry all of the cost of infrastructure, it can serve as a barrier for entry to the market. Not all developers have enough capital to undertake large infrastructure projects for new development. New developments cost a lot of money with infrastructure. I think on average, I've been seeing between $3 to $9 million for new housing developers or developments. That can be very cost prohibitive for many developers. And so you limit the number of developers that would have access to the market, and that could result in an increase in market prices for lots. I just list that as an advantage. That's a policy issue. Growth with special assessments. Many communities around the country are facing issues with how do we pay for infrastructure? How do we manage our roads? How do we manage our water treatment plants? How do we manage these different types of infrastructure? With this funding mechanism, cities have the ability to have a revenue source to allow the city to grow through its infrastructure. And finally, the city can control its risk by requiring letters of credit from a developer. You may ask, what is a letter of credit? A letter of credit is a document that is issued by a bank. It has three parties. The first party is the bank. The second party is the developer, and the third party is the beneficiary. And the beneficiary is normally the city. And so what does that mean? If the developer is in default, either on the payment of specials on vacant lots, or if the developer is in violation of some other term of the development agreement, the city can pull from the letter of credit and provide additional security to make those debt service payments. What are the disadvantages? One of the disadvantages to having the city fund new development through special assessments is the city is carrying a large amount of debt. As a policy perspective, some policymakers don't like to carry a large amount of debt. That debt can impact credit ratings. It can impact a city's ability to borrow money in the future. The other disadvantages is it requires administration of contracts, and it can result in potential market distortions. Just as we see on the one side where it allows more developers into the market, it can also allow some developers to price their lots differently than if they would have to include the cost of infrastructure within the lot price. And then it also it requires additional security from the developer. Typically in our area, greenfield developments receive 100% of the special assessment. What are the greenfield issues related to developer funding? Once again, there's no city debt that's issued, so it's an advantage. Typically, we see in the market the developer has lower engineering costs. That's because the developer can negotiate those types of prices better with the engineer than the political subdivision. It's not necessarily true, and we're only talking a few percentage points. The developer is not required to follow public bidding laws, which you may ask, well, why is that an advantage? Well, the developer might have a close relationship with its construction company, and it can reduce the costs and just directly award the contract to its construction company. There are no payment or performance bonds for the developer. A payment bond and a performance bond provides security to the city so that in the event that the contractor walks off the job, the city can make a claim against the performance or payment bond to complete the development. What are the disadvantages? Loss of control by the city over the design. So the issues related to, do the pipes work right? Do the velocities of the lift station match up? Is the pond the right size? Is the road the right thickness? There's a tremendous loss of that control and making sure that all the infrastructure for the city fits together. We've also seen from a very long case study standpoint in times of economic recession in Minneapolis, where they use a lot more developer-funded developments. When that developer fails, it's often the city that has to step in. And so if the city has to step into a development that it had no control over, oftentimes the costs are higher for it to take control. City inspections are still required, and you still have the cost of administering the contract. So reconstruction, this is the area that's probably the most controversial, and that it becomes very financially burdensome to levy special assessments on existing businesses for 100% and property owners for 100% of improvement costs. So by century code, the entire cost of the project for reconstruction can be assessed out to the district. And you can imagine if you're an existing property owner and the road costs $10 million to build brand new, it might cost $11 million to reconstruct because you're working in an existing area. 100% of those costs can be assessed back. That can be very difficult for existing property owners to deal with an assessment that's essentially the same size as if they had a new home and with a new assessment. And so that's really where the city of Fargo has been working with its different infrastructure policies to figure out how does the city fund those reconstructions so as to reduce the burden on property owners. My understanding is the city has other uses of revenue to supplement that reconstruction. They have sales taxes and utility revenues, the prairie dog bill, and then also there's external federal and state grants. I'd note that all these projects cost a lot of money, and all of these additional sources of funding don't necessarily add up to the amount of the cost. And so there's limited capacity in the other funds to pay for all the reconstruction. So hence you have to have some type of other payment mechanism if you're going to proceed with the projects. I know I've been brief. If you have additional questions, please feel free to ask, or my entire presentation is on tape. So, thank you.
Good evening. I'm John Cosgrove. That was fun, wasn't it? Made it pretty simple. What I'm charged with doing in our task force committee all sat away from me, and that's because I'm supposed to summarize our findings. So with that, what I'd like to do is just run really quickly through this and talk about what we came to consensus, not unanimous agreement, consensus. And this was through a survey. At the time we did this, prairie dog was talked about, but not a reality, so we didn't consider that. So when we looked after 10 months of much more detail, John, I appreciate you keeping it short tonight. There were things I think I missed in those 10 previous meetings, or 9 previous meetings, but the consensus that we came to is, first of all, that, and not very popular, special assessments should continue. And just by a show of hands, how many people like special assessments? Just me. We have one other back there. 2, all right. Well, the consensus was we have to continue special assessments in some manner. And that's not to say that they can't be improved, they can't be changed. The biggest thing is the cost of special assessments to the residents had to be reduced. It's very expensive. Infrastructure replacement has gotten just wildly expensive. And so if we're going to do that, we've got to find other ways to find the funds. Unfortunately, a city has one source of revenue, and that's you. There's very few other ways we can operate utilities. We can try to make profits that way. But if we're going to reduce specials, we're going to have to look for some other tax form to do that. Prairie Dog, and I think both Commissioners Gehrig and Grinberg will talk about that, can be a very valuable tool to us. The other part, and this is where we start to get into the weeds and a little bit deeper, is sometimes on a bond issue there are savings, there's residual balances, and it's been the policy of the city to just move that to the general fund and not try and figure out how it would go back to the individual homeowners. If you think of a 25-year assessment, you may have 5 homeowners all paying special assessments. If you're trying to return a residual or a reduced interest payment, who gets it? The last person that owns it? Do you prorate it over that? But those are some of the things that we had to look at. The transparency of the process, and I really am happy to see so many people here tonight. When I saw all the chairs, I thought, wow, this would really be great. But specials are probably the most misunderstood tax that there is. And the information and how you process it and think about it needs to be improved, and the city continually needs to add that transparency as we work through those options. So the group, again, in consensus, not unanimous, the city should continue to special assess the cost of new sewers, paving, and water mains. This is what's termed the greenfield development. These are the new developments, and that the city should continue to have a role in that process. Special assessment should be used, continue to be used to fund reconstruction. And this is difficult. This is one that pains a lot of people. They may have paid off their house, everything else, and suddenly their infrastructure is at end of life. And you have to replace sewer and water and sidewalks, arterial roads. It can be very expensive. So we think specials have a place there and should be used. The one thing that I think is very dangerous is what I call abandonment by neglect. We can't reduce repairs to fix the problem. And I was on the city commission late 90s, early 2000s. We had over 250 miles of water lines to repair each winter. And it's because we deferred maintenance on it. So the group did say, we can't just reduce our repairs out of the way. I kind of joked that the only time people would support special assessments is for a pothole in the spring. If we could put a sign up and say, you know, who wants to be special assessed to fix that pothole? But if we do that, we're going to cause ourselves problems. So, another thing that we came up to, we don't know how to do this yet, and I look at Mr. Costin, our city finance director. This will be a problem for them. But if there is refinancing of special assessments, we should find a way to move those interest savings and those with special balances back to whoever's paying them. I'm not sure we can do that. Now remember, the money doesn't just fly away. It goes back into the general fund. And so if we reduce monies coming from this mechanism into the general fund, the mayor and the commissioners have additional budget problems that they have to deal with. If a project is fully paid for, the city should rebate that fund balance to the property owners within the district. And you'd say, how does that happen in a financing vehicle? But there are prepayments, there's different things that can happen, and the bonds underlying the special assessment can be paid off early, and those savings would then in some manner move back. And the last one is that if there is a fund balance at the end of a special assessment, we shouldn't transfer that into the general fund. It should be used in infrastructure. So the other thing we think would help, and the task force looked at, special assessments kind of pop up on people. It's not something that you see coming. You flush your toilet, whatever happens there, it goes away. You don't have to think about it anymore. You turn on your water, the water comes out. You drive down your street, it's all good. We think the city should look at a longer-term capital improvement plan. So as you look at your neighborhood, you can anticipate when these things might be coming, have a little better time to plan for and get ready for the special assessments. In the greenfields, in the new construction, we need to set deadlines when we'll go out for bid for that. What happens is typically in a climate like ours, bids go out in the winter months, very competitive. Contractors are looking for work, and you can get very competitive prices. If you wait to go out for bid till midsummer, contractors all have bid work lined up, maybe behind on projects, prices tend to go up. So if we're going to do greenfields, we need to do it on a schedule that maximizes the number of bidders and the potential to lower costs. We should continue to look at the bidding process to find any ways that we can be more efficient in that. And as always, the city needs to provide more information on specials. The information's there, but it's not always readily available. So, now it's your turn.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
Okay, to move into the public comment period, as a reminder, the microphone is over to your right. And does everybody have a handout? If not, we can get handouts distributed, but what I'd like to do is the handout, the next slide, let me back up, my apologies. You also have the opportunity, as mentioned earlier, to provide your public comments and opinions through the City of Fargo website, as well as the public forum tonight. So if things that come up that you think about after leaving here tonight, make sure you let us know. And so what I'd like to do is just, I'm going to move right to the next slide because it's identified in your handout. So I'd like to open it up for comment on new developments, Greenfield, as outlined in your handout. This is kind of a summary of what your thoughts are. Is that a fair way to start? I don't see any heads nodding either direction, so we'll, yes, ma'am. Please. Ma'am, the mayor is being assertive. He's bringing the microphone.
They're more towards the middle, so it'll probably be easier for them.
And Commissioner Garrick and I talked about that, but we were told the camera. So.
This isn't my thing, so. We live down in 64th Avenue and 31st Street, and we were in part of a section that had a horse barn. We were the only people there, and the city built up around us. We don't fall within a greenfield category or reconstruction, but we were charged special assessments as much as the very expensive houses going in just to the north of us and beside us. So what can you do for us? We're still looking at $70,000 in specials, not to mention 64th Avenue being paved. We'll add more. So we're in a really rough spot. We've been trying to sell and we can't because people look at the specials and they just go, that's not going to work. And then the other question I have is when you make a decision, will that go back in time, or does that start like the day you make a decision as far as what's going to happen with
likely to
special
be implemented in 2020 when the dollars become available. From the Prairie Dog perspective, that's
So that
likely what's going to happen when we get new
benefit
additional state
anybody
funding.
in the last year or two?
I'd ask Commissioner Garrick or Mayor Mahoney their thoughts, or maybe Brenda Derrig.
Okay. I'm going to go sit down because
What was the original amount of your assessment, though? I'm curious about that, 'cause that's an important part of the story.
it was like $380,000.
$380,000 was assessed to your home?
$390,000.
Okay. So it's a significant amount of money. Most people would not be able to afford that. So we worked with you all to reduce that down to 70 now. On a case-by-case basis, we'll try to work with folks on that. I think we're talking more about policy, overall policy, and there's always going to be one-offs, things that happen, and we will try to work with you guys on those type of things. But I'm glad that you guys brought that up, because it is important that sometimes holes in the policy can result in life-altering things like you guys were saying.
And we're not the only ones.
Absolutely.
facing that. There's a lot of other
Yep, and to Tony's point, I mean, I don't think anyone's talking about retroactively forgiving special assessments. That would be, I want to make a point to the folks here, we have $500 million in debt from special assessments. $500 million in debt from special assessments from the city of Fargo. So when we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of using special assessments for greenfield expansion, that's part of the disadvantage that I think gets underplayed a lot. If there is a development that gets defaulted, we may not be able to cover that difference. And the city is on the hook for those dollars. So if these folks, for example, didn't pay their $70,000 assessment, someone's going to have to. And it's going to be the other taxpayers that do that.
If you come and talk to our engineering department, a couple things you can do is defer your payment 10 years. That sometimes happens, but you also need to talk to the department to see what else is in that. Because there are some things that if you're in an area, then it gets developed all the way around you. There's some different things we have to look at. So please come in and talk to our team and see what they look at that, please. Because we have found some areas where we are able to reduce it even more.
Other comments on this section? Yes, sir. Do you have your hand?
I'm not going to follow the format. I'm just going to make some comments.
Well, can we hold those till the end then? Okay, yep. If that's okay. Okay. We'll move along if there are no other comments on this section. Again, this is listed in your handout, so I don't feel I have to read through that again. If you'd like me to, we can, but I'll move right to the next area, comments on cap costs. Brenda Derrigs with City Engineering is with us. If we have any technical questions, she certainly can back me up on that. Comments, thoughts, need more information on what cap cost means? This is your time. Any comments from the task force members as well? I mean, feel free to make comment as well for those on the task force. What's that? Yeah. Going once, going twice. I'm not going to say sold, but we're moving on. Again, this is information in your handout. Take a moment or two to read through that, and then I will ask thoughts on reconstruction. As well, if everyone needs a pen, we can certainly get a pen to you. If you want to write your thoughts down and submit those, just raise your hand. We'll get a pen to you with the handout, but looking for all options here. Yes, sir.
I just have a question about the projects are assessed to those properties that directly benefit from the improvements. Now, I'm talking about a street 10 blocks away that I'm being assessed for because it's in that assessment district. How do you do that? How do you, because I've looked at the last one on 25th, of which there's been 3 in the last 5 or 6 years. We've been assessed for that thing, I don't know how many times. Didn't seem like very good planning, that we kept getting it redone. But the areas that are involved in making up this, whether it's not just people directly in front of the road that's being put in, I can understand that. But it's the periphery, and who uses it? 17th is going to be another big reconstruction. That's been another can of worms since they put that overpass in there, and none of us wanted it. and it lowered our property values, increased our specials, and now we're going to do it again because it needs it, because of the extra traffic, which a lot of it is coming from West Fargo. You're not going to assess out there. So I think that part of it needs to be looked at somehow. I don't know how you fix it, but it doesn't seem very, very fair. I just don't understand that part of it. And I think there's some improvement could be done.
Great questions. I'm going to ask Dan Eberhardt, who is our city expert, who leads the special assessments portfolio, to answer your question. Or, no, that was passed to Brenda Derrick, city engineer.
So I think what you're referencing is our arterial roads. And so yes, the arterial roads have an arterial band. And so there is a capped cost that's associated with those arterial roads. Those are the roads that are deemed arterials that could qualify also for federal funds. But that is also one of the categories that we've been looking at, because your comment is exactly one that we continually get of the costs associated with those arterial roads, because everyone is using them, which is why we try and cap those costs and minimize those costs, and then also include some sales tax into those projects. So that is also one area that we've been discussing and that the commission will be looking at.
Anything to add, Dan? Okay.
Good evening. It's a point to make that every parcel in the city of Fargo is affected by one north-south and one east-west arterial. So Main Avenue, east-west, 25th Street, north-south arterial. So you mentioned that you got hit by 25th Street 3 times.
2 for sure, I think 3. I've been there 20.
That I'm assured wouldn't happen because we section them off. We don't pay for all of 25th Street, just the portion that's in that band, say from 17th Avenue to Interstate. That would be one portion, which would cover to the east and to the west. But we don't overlap when we do an arterial. I just want to make that clear, clarify that. And it is a capped, and again, as Brenda stated, it is a capped cost, but you are affected by one north-south, one east-west arterial. So you could get 2 different arterials. Like you could have gotten 13th Avenue and 25th Street.
Yeah, I live on almost 17th and 25th.
Correct.
So I got the one on 25th and 13th
Yes.
just recently, and that made no sense, that area that went all the way over to I-29 and went 4 blocks east. So I didn't understand how that one went right down to...
Our bands are typically set up on a half-mile base, half mile either side of the arterial, or halfway to the next arterial. So like 25th Street does go all the way to I-29 to the west, and halfway to University Drive on the east.
If you have any questions, feel free to contact our office, the Special Assessment Office at the City of Fargo, and we'll be happy to take time to answer any question. Go through your properties personally and see what we have assessed for you. That's always open and available to you.
Thank you.
Just one thing, John. The problem, we're having trouble with arterials. A lot of people in town would have that issue with arterials. And when we say cap costs, we oftentimes are not charging the whole price. When we say that 70/30, we're often capping how much your cost is. So that's what's telling what people are trying to do. So we went back to the old policy, it caps those costs. But you could come in and talk to Dan, we'll talk about it. But we're having troubles in North Fargo. Sometimes the arterials are too close together, so it doesn't spread out as much as in South Fargo. You can go out those distances. So when people get assessed, it's not as much money. And so the north side was more money. That's one of the things we're looking at on the arterials. We need to do something different. So it's a good question, and we will look into that.
Should we move to the next? Anybody have any additional comments? Okay, again, now we're on arterials, so timely. Again, this information is on your handout. Comments that build on gentleman's point about arterials. I don't want to single out any task force members, but maybe Christie has a comment or two she'd like to share. I feel like I'm the orchestra director here. Got to make people sing or talk or. Certainly, and you'll be on camera.
So I have a huge concern with the way arterials are assessed. We own a small apartment building, and we were originally assessed $50,000 for the 4th Street project. In talking to Mayor Mahoney and all of the commissioners, the consensus was to drop the way the city, it was 50-50 at that time, and they dropped it to 70-30. We are still assessed $22,000. The home across the street could have 12 residents in it. There's no code against that, and they are assessed about $1,300. I just think that, and we don't front foot 4th Street. I think arterial roads are a huge problem. I don't know what the answer is, but it's a huge problem.
Well, my perspective in part, maybe a couple of comments, Christie. One is, a more long-term capital improvement plan, and then budgeting accordingly, and then the arterial impact on arterial costs as well will be eligible for prairie dog funding. So as we manage this moving forward, it's going to have less impact on, in your case, it would help if it were in place today. How much, I can't tell you that standing here today, but it certainly will be one of the avenues we take as far as addressing and putting these dollars towards these various costs.
So would that be directly on 4th Street, or is that the entire district? Do you know?
I want to look to Dan.
The prairie dog.
Well, prairie dog will be the funds that come to the city for the specials.
Right,
Yep.
right, but for the arterial roads, then does that include that entire district? Like you were talking about arterial roads. For the prairie dog fund, does that then affect that entire district?
That's to be determined, but a pro rata share of that could be allocated towards that particular area of cost versus the overall assessments in the entire district. So that I believe we'd have the ability to dedicate, say it was $2 million of prairie dog for that special assessment district. We could dedicate some of that towards arterial and the rest of the property owners for the general assessments or the specials for the rest of the project, I believe.
Really quick, Tony, we can use the prairie dog fund for all infrastructure. So we could take away all assessments, basically. So not only for the arterials, but for your local road, your sidewalk, or whatever else we wanted to use it for. So to answer your question, yes, we could use it for that entire arterial. We use it for all of them in the city of Fargo so that people don't have to worry about those 2 roads anymore and how much they're being used and things like that. We just say, well, all these roads are heavily traveled, right? Everyone basically uses them at one point or another. Therefore, the city will just fund that through the prairie dog fund, or all assessments through the prairie dog fund. So that's why I want the input from people here to talk about that, because if we wanted to go that direction, we certainly could use those dollars. Those dollars are eligible for all those infrastructure needs that we were talking about.
Other thoughts on arterials? I did get a text that the prairie dog funds are capped from the state at $230 million. So if oil goes to $100 a barrel, we're not going to get more prairie dog funds. We're capped, at least for this biennium. So
Capped how much?
$230 million total statewide. So, yep. So somebody's watching and texting from the different location. Yes, sir.
One quick question, the rationale for the cap cost for arterial reconstruction is $15 a front foot. Now, I'm not quite sure how that process came. I have a neighbor next door to me has a driveway, and I live next to him, and I'm on the curb. And I pay twice as much for the special that he does for the street that we can only drive one car at a time. So what is the rationale for using that as a criteria for?
I'm going to look to Dan again. It's his job to know all these details.
The $15 cap that you're talking about is for an indirect benefit. On an arterial, you have your direct benefit and your indirect. Those that directly front or abut an arterial have a direct cost. Single family is the short side of the lot. Commercial and MRs currently pay for the whole frontage they have, whether they front and side to it, they'll have two costs on it. So in this case, you're talking $15 a front foot. If you direct front, that's for the indirect. Direct front is a higher rate. But the $15 is the indirect. So if you don't direct front an arterial, you have the indirect cost. So everybody that's not direct fronting is getting charged $15 front foot.
The indirect cost is based on frontage still.
Correct.
And that's what I'm asking. Why? To me, that doesn't make any sense. If we've got a road that's 10 blocks away,
And that it's
constructing, and I'm just getting assessed for that road.
But it's, as an arterial, we set up our bands. And those bands, we charge you for one north-south, one east-west, two arterials. Let's say your arterial is 25th Street and 13th Avenue. We're not going to charge you for Main Avenue. We're not going to charge you for 32nd Avenue. So you're paying in those bands for those arterials.
It's just a policy.
It's a policy.
We can change it. We can do whatever we
Well,
want.
no, I just didn't think that made any sense at all to me, so.
Note that. Additional feedback on arterials. Moving along. Again, this is listed in your handout. So we'll go right to comment on transparency and communication. I think just about everybody has expressed their thoughts and sentiments around improving our communication and transparency on the overall approach during the task force discussions. A number of comments were made that, particularly in new areas, every 9 to 12 months you receive another notice. And I think that was reflective of some of the home builders and the realtors in town, is as they sell property, the homeowner gets frustrated because they're continually getting these assessment notices, where the city should look at maybe a better management of their overall area so that there's one special assessment and not continual ones until things are caught up with development. And that's an area that I think we need to focus on with management of the city and our capital improvement plan as an example of that, so that you don't get 5 of these in 4 years once you move into a new area, as an example. But welcome your thoughts, and your comments were spot on with how the uniqueness of your situation on South 25th Street. But your thoughts of how do we do? Are we doing our job? Ideas how we could do it better. This is a great opportunity to share that. And again, if you don't want to make comment publicly, write it down and send it in. This is very important. Any comments from task force members, or I'm going to move on? Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mahoney, Mayor of the City of Fargo. But one thing to think about before he wraps up here, if you write down comments on what we've talked about tonight and shared, and your ideas, also if you have ways that we could, yes sir, you want to follow the mayor, or you want to go before the mayor? Okay. And any advice or any suggestions how to improve this presentation would also be welcome as well.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm going to make a prediction. I do not believe that this committee will recommend any real changes to the special assessment system. Just like the outcome of the West Fargo meetings, no real changes will be made. These meetings were held simply to cool off the taxpayers and preserve the special assessment status quo. The reason for this entire situation is that the government of the city of Fargo was arrogant and careless in their use of special assessments, and the public blew their tops. Special assessments were never intended to be used for routine maintenance, but like a drug addiction, once the city was hooked, they couldn't stop. Here's what I hope I don't have to do. It will be an easy but time-consuming task to gather 1,400 signatures and put the elimination of special assessments on the ballot, or at least curtail their use. The last I heard, we still live in a democracy. When taxpayers get a chance to repeal special assessments for reconstruction, they will not fail to do so. Other cities don't even have special assessments for reconstruction. They use property taxes. No one will ever vote for special assessments. It will be an easy task to gather 1,400 signatures and an even easier task to win the election. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I think a lot of you have been kind of quiet because you weren't sure what to say. Specials are somewhat complex. When I came into town, I was paying 50% of special assessments, so when everything got done in my house, it was 50%. The new policy brings us up to 70%. If you want to look at things you can change, the task force has a couple different items we talked about. Administrative fee. How much do we need on the administrative fee over the time of a 25-year bond? We went, as one of the two cities in the state, went from 1.5 to 1.0. We are thinking and looking at it with Ken Costin, can we go down a little bit more on that administrative fee? Maybe 0.75. All you want to really recover is that when we do a bond, we pay the origination fee. So we basically pay the origination fee. If 15 to 20% of your population prepays their specials, we still have to pay interest for 25 years. So we have to have enough money in there to do that. And if, God forbid, somebody defaulted, we'd have to pay for that. So at the end, we don't necessarily make a huge profit over that, but for your bond ratings, you get a better bond rating if you have that protected. So is it 1% or 0.75? I'm not sure which one we need, but we're going to look at that, and the task force teed that up. For developers, what they'd love is maybe we drop our engineering fee percentage, and maybe we drop our administrative fee a percentage. So that decreases the cost people are charged when they're building a house. That more helps the builder or somebody developing something to the homeowner. To what it might do is relate is maybe they will drop their fees 1 or 2%. It would maybe help, but it's always hard to see. Arterials have been teed up. Arterials are something we do talk about. The engineers are looking at different ways of doing that. And Christy, to your point, sometimes a small apartment building is getting hit too hard because they go into a different zoning. Is there a better way of doing that? Because a big apartment building obviously could pay more for their specials. But if you're in a smaller footprint, what do you do? So as the task force was working, what happened is the state legislative body went after a prairie dog fund. We never were sure that could happen. And so to Tony Gary's comment, you know, do nothing is not an option. The beautiful thing about, if you look at the prairie dog fund, if we go back to that first slide, that successfully can impact specials. So if you look at the 3 examples we have there, it's a huge amount of impact to everybody in this room. Unfortunately, it's specials going forward. It's not specials going backwards. It would probably be something that the commission would look at. It would be something that may start in January. But the Prairie Dog Fund, the $13 million, if we have $28 million worth of specials going on a year, that $13 million makes a significant impact, and that will impact anybody going forward on specials. And the city is committed that this infrastructure, Prairie Dog, was for infrastructure, and that's where we would put it. We may also use it on arterials as our problem child, but we have to kind of figure that out. My hope is that the engineers will look at this and say, where are problems in the present city structure and what can we fix or make better? The other thing you have to remember is that you're paying a 1 cent sales tax for our infrastructure in the city of Fargo. Not everybody does that. Not every city does that. And that really helps us, because that's $24 million a year that you have pushed into different things that need to be done. John was talking about water leaks. We used to have 250 a year. We're down to 50 to 60 now. We're replacing all the old waterway mains that we have throughout the city. And the other thing is, as a city, we're tasked with flood protection, and everybody has done a great job on the flood protection, but that still consumes a lot of capital. So until we get that project done, that's going to consume capital for us. So I think this, Commissioner Grunberg and Commissioner Garrick are going to bring some recommendations to the commission. We're going to listen to what you have to say. And if you go to that website, www.fargonorthdakota.gov specials, that will help us as well. And yeah, we don't like specials. We have to have some way. We have to have some revenue to pay for improvements, and this is one of the tools that we have that has worked. It's hard to dissemble it all. It's hard to pay it all off, but there are some ways in which we can ease the burden a bit, and I think that we're going to go through. So there are a lot of options discussed. If you have any better options, we'd love to see them. One of the options also is increase utilities. You can increase your utilities and pay down your specials. That could happen. There's a fairness, people talk about that. So any variety of revenue you decrease, you got to figure out how to replace that revenue. So whenever we get into those kind of discussions, that's something that has to be done. I know, Bernie, in the West Fargo thing, you talked about the not always specialing everything in the development. So maybe you don't put in street lights, or maybe some things, amenities that you have, you don't put into that. We have 2 sites that have developed without specials, but when we look at the cost overall at the end, the lot prices are similar as to what our lot price with specials would be. We haven't seen a great advantage when a developer does it. There's 2 developments in Moorhead that were tried with developers that did not do well. So there's a little reluctance to push it all back to that. Our argument has always been you'll have more people in new developments if you allow specials to continue. I know it's an argument either way of what to do in greenfields. And task force members, I want to thank you for all your hard work. You've done how many meetings? 10, 15 meetings? I mean, it seems like forever, and you went through a lot of stuff. And I remember John Shockley's first presentation was a lot of data to take in. But I'd love it if the task force members maybe put up their things too, that they think, here's what we think would be our best option. I think that Prairie Dog Fund makes significant changed in our specials. So we break it up now. We have all sorts of staff here that if you want to come up and talk to them, there's special cases that you have, please do that. And the commissioners are here to take comment as well. Anybody you want to talk to, please step forward and do that now. Tony, is that the end of it? Yep. Thank you very much.